So in patch 2.4, the Blizzard team attempted to accomplish something that has long been a thorn in the sides of a particular type of barbarian build, and that would be the throw barbarian. And they were attempting to solve for one of the issues, which was on a ranged class, you weren't able to get the biggest benefit out of the strongest stat for a ranged attacker, which is pierce or chance to pierce. Even with the best items in the game, the most pierce that you could get on your character was 83% on a single weapon, and your offhand would only have 33%. But they gave us something new in the form of throw mastery, actually giving you percent pierce. Now, I was testing out the throw barb, and I came to a couple different conclusions while working with some members in chat who say that they are really hardcore throw barbarian players, have been playing it for years. They were stopping in very specifically to see the type of testing that I was doing. And I realized that there were a couple traps that anyone who is new to the throw barbarian might fall into, a couple gear decisions and skill decisions that I think make for a better play style and really open up the barbarian. But what I am trying to do is create a throw barbarian that actually feels good piloting in a plethora of different farming strategy scenarios and solves for all of the problems. So if you think there's no way for me to do that, I look forward to trying to prove you wrong in this video. So I would say right off the bat, there are 5 problems which need to be addressed for the throw barbarian to feel like a truly multifaceted character that you would be willing to pilot at different stages in the game with different types of gear and actually have a good time and never stall out. The first most important one is obviously the quantity issue. So in Diablo 2 Resurrected, your weapons are going to have a quantity. And even though your weapons are going to have the stat of replenishes quantity, this really isn't fast enough to make it so that you can consistently farm on this build. So the first problem is our ranged attacker has no real way of managing their quantity. Now, the way that's handled previously in the past is literally having multiple sets of weapons, as well as not using ethereal-based weapons so that you can actually go repair at Charcy, which helps out a little bit, but is A, a gold sink, and B, makes it so that you can't use the best-in-slot weapons reliably. So then you fall back to having multiple sets. And even this is very clunky. Now with the shared stash, you obviously have more space, but getting 3 to 4 sets of the perfect rolled best in slot weapons, even though they don't see a lot of use outside of the throw barb, is just difficult to get your hands on. Not a lot of people are trying to sell them, and the people who are trying to sell them are going to expect to get the value out of them that your character needs them for, when they're not really worth that much. Their rarity alone is something that's jacking up the price. So the first thing that we attempt to solve here on the Barbarian is how do we deal with quantity? And that's when the entirety of the build opened up to me, and what I think to be the superior version of this if you're not using it for hyper niche elite farming. With the advent of the synergy increased stamina increasing the duration of Frenzy, a double throw Barbarian gets to put 1 point into Frenzy, have nearly 10 seconds of Frenzy speed, and also have a very competent damage dealing source in Frenzy itself. So I think at this point, the best way to build out this character would actually be a hybrid between Frenzy and Double Throw. Now, this isn't new, but what I'm going to go further into because of this is going to help eliminate some of those other issues. Issue number 2 is density clear versus targeting clear. So the moment that you add 100% pierce onto a ranged attacker, your first thought is, boom, now I can clear density, just like other classes with AoE. This is very similar to the lightning sorceress on paper. The problem here is that the lightning sorceress doesn't have quantity. So while you are able to put out a ton of damage in a straight line, you're only able to hit up to 5 targets per toss, and that's if you have a 100% chance to hit and your pierce always goes off and the monster doesn't block. When you add all of that up, you realize that the attack rating on the throw barb isn't great. You're not getting close to 100% chance to hit, even with a full inventory of 3 max 20 AR charms. You would actually need the Grand Charm with 100 plus AR per slot to get close enough to be near 100%. But when you sit here, and we'll use cows as a really good example of what a density clearing build is meant to do, the throw barb just doesn't perform on anything higher than players 1 settings. And a density clearing build is meant to kill on higher player settings, so you get the best no drop chances on all of the monsters that you're killing with your collateral AoE damage. That's when we realized that the throw barbarian doesn't just need to be an elite sniper, but isn't really a wide density clearer. It is a small density clearer. So any indoor area where your targets are confined to a space is going to work really well on this build. So think the pits, ancient tunnels, even Chaos Sanctuary in the Travancore. Again, you have a small area with a lot of mobs that are going to stay densely packed, where you get to benefit both from your frenzy mobility, your frenzy damage when you have less than 3 targets in a straight line, and then double throw for anywhere that has legitimate density with monsters running towards you. And I think that's one of the most important things to try to wrap your head around when we're thinking about this version of the double throw barbarian. Frenzy is a skill that you use to competently dual wield weapons and attack at a good speed with high damage on an amount of targets that you wouldn't get the full benefit of double throw out of. It would just be inefficient to use double throw in these scenarios. While you're going to do more damage, you're only going to be hitting 1 to 2 targets. This is where Frenzy comes in to clean up and save you quantity on your weapons, so that you can consistently get to the end of a farming session without running out of full quantity. This is going to mean that you only need 2 sets of your weapons maximum to continuously rinse and repeat farming in areas that have good solidified density indoors. The third problem with double throw is mobility. And when I say problem, I mean a challenge more than a problem. On the Barbarian, it's very easy to just slap an Enigma and then 105 FCR on your swap with suicide branches. And as long as you have one more piece somewhere else on your gear, you are able to teleport on your swap really easily, get around, and then swap back to your main hands where your weapons are. Now, on a melee build, Enigma is going to pretty drastically reduce your overall damage output, especially on higher player settings. And the problem is, not everybody is going to have an Enigma. So, with the vast improvement of leap and leap attacks movement speed, along with a drastic improved duration on Frenzy, you're actually getting something out of getting your Frenzy charges up on those small packs of monsters and drastically increasing your overall mobility without having to have Enigma and without sacrificing a massive damage piece like Chains of Honor, or even better, a Fortitude on your physical damage build. For me personally, being able to wear something like a Fortitude literally just makes the build feel more like its appropriate identity for me, and this gets a bit more into how you want the build to feel versus what's the quote-unquote most efficient way of playing the game. But the Frenzy setup for the hybrid also solves for the challenge of mobility without you needing to have an Enigma on every single character, and also getting the benefit out of Fortitude, which lets you more easily handle higher player settings difficulty, and again, it saves you on that quantity. Less thrown weapons needed to kill a monster means more throw weapons to kill more monsters. The fourth problem that I see on this version of the Double Throw Barbarian was the actual weapons themselves. So you'll see here that I'm using 2 ethereal lacerators. And very typically, the proto Double Throw Barbarian is actually going to use a War Shrike in one hand and a lacerator in the offhand. You keep the lacerator around because it has decent damage, and it's also going to proc that amplified damage, so that you're getting the benefits of doubling your physical damage. But the War Shrike comes along with 50% pierce, a massive amount of deadly strike as well, and is just a higher damage output when it is thrown. Now, since we are going Frenzy, we are able to pick up Axe Mastery. And why is it so important to have double Mastery? Throw Mastery is going to increase your damage, attack rating, and crit chance when the weapons are used to throw, no matter what the weapon is, a javelin, a dagger, or an axe. But when those same weapons are used in melee combat, you don't get the benefit of Throwing Mastery. You get the benefit of whatever mastery the weapon type is. And sadly, there is no weapon mastery that'll increase the damage of a dagger. So when you swap over to Frenzy, which is helping to alleviate all of the issues that we've already talked about, your Axe Mastery is applying to your Lacerator and nothing's applying to War Strike. So you're missing out on a ton of attack rating, a ton of additional crit chance, and a huge amount of enhanced damage. So, if you're going for the Frenzy hybrid, just doubling up on Lacerators means that you're able to get the full benefit of Mastery, regardless of whether or not you're using Frenzy or Throw. And it does come along with some other benefits as well. Having 2 times the Lacerators just means that you are twice as likely to proc Amplified damage. And since you are twice as likely to proc Amplified damage, you're able to run a bigger damage source on your Mercenary in the form of a Pride Rune Work. Normally, on any build that's trying to deal physical damage to its target, Reaper's Toll would just be a better option. But here, this Barbarian is so self-sufficient, anything that you can do to help buff your damage on attack is again going to decrease total quantity used on your throwing weapons, increasing the length of time that you can successfully farm for, and help to buoy your frenzy damage so that it's just as competent on single targets as your throw damage would be on multiple targets. So the Might Merc with a Pride rune word here is going to give you such a bigger benefit to your overall functionality on this build, and you don't suffer from not having Reaper's Toll on a physical damage build. The last and final piece to the pie that I would say is the biggest problem on a double throw Barbarian is being able to stack enough damage and enough attack rating without absolutely breaking your bank. So the testing that we're doing here, which was on Player 7 pit runs, is using some expensive pieces, and it's mostly down in the charms and in the form of this crafted ring. But these things aren't really as necessary as you might think, especially somewhere around players 3 to 5, which are much more likely to be able to replicate online and in multiplayer, since it's so difficult to actually get a full team of players together where you're not expected to be doing something with them, like Bale runs or Chaos runs or whatever you happen to be doing. While the charms down here give you the best wiggle room as far as damage, attack rating, and overall survivability, the rest of the kit really isn't expensive the moment that you stop looking at this and you stop looking at this ring. So you need to have 2 ethereal lacerators, and since we're solving so hard for the quantity issue, I would say that you probably never need more than another set of these throwing weapons, if you need them at all. Since you are a very competent frenzy build, you can actually just take a quick farming session, maybe go do players 1 Travancore, where the players count really isn't that important since you're going to be using find item anyway, and you just melee while these are regenerating quantity. Now, meleeing is going to use some of the durability, but not nearly as much as double throwing. So as long as you're willing to shake up where you are farming, you might find yourself in a situation where you never even need a second set of weapons. Obviously, Fortitude with a low rune in it is going to be expensive at the beginning of the ladder season, especially since everybody wants to build a Fortitude for their melee character. But this is just the best in slot version. You can definitely get away with using a Lionheart before you bump up to a Fortitude. And then after that, other than maybe the High Lords here, which obviously just about every melee class wants to use a High Lords, but I would never really argue that this is very difficult to acquire at certain points, the rest of the gear is very easy to come across. So, in lieu of having a Heart of the Oak and a Call to Arms on swap for the biggest bow, you could just use 2 blue Warcry sticks. I will say that Lacerator is bare minimum the weapon that you would need to make this build work, but if you start off with just non-ethereal Lacerators, you completely eliminate your quantity issue because you can just go back and repair, and then eventually upgrade into ethereal once you have the money to do so. The helmet that I'm using on this build is a Wisdom. Wisdom basically solves every single problem on this build. And let me just very quickly go over how powerful this is, especially on Throw Barbarian. So not only bringing the 33% Pierce to the kit, which if you add that to the 48% Pierce on Throwing Mastery, you're already at 81% Pierce, so you don't even really need a Razor Tail. Again, the Frenzy Hybrid lets you have a very competent melee version of this skill, so you're only going to be using Double Throw when there's enough density to warrant it. So having 100% Pierce, while definitely better, isn't a necessity. This helmet is also going to give you percentile bonus attack rating, which is super important on a double throw build. And then everything else on this, and I'm going to leave the best for last here, solves for all of your mana problems. So not only are you getting 8% mana stolen per hit, which is halved for a ranged attack, so you're getting 4% mana per hit, you're also getting mana after each kill, and then damage taken goes to mana. So when you run up into frenzy range, you are almost certainly going to refill your entire mana globe when you're getting hit, Once you kill a monster at range, you're going to get a flat amount of mana back, and then each attack is also going to gain you a good amount of mana. And especially on Frenzy, you'll get the full benefit of the 8%. So you literally don't have mana issues on this character without needing to put anything on your Mercenary or adding anything else to your gear, especially once you have a really high level battle orders. And then the last thing on Wisdom here is cannot be frozen. So you could prioritize building this if you do not have a Ravenfrost yet. You just need to find a pull rune, which you can get off of your Hellforges, or literally just cube up to after running Hell Countess for a little bit. It's really not that difficult to get into a pull rune if you are fixated on getting to that end goal. And building Wisdom in a Barbarian helmet with 3 staff mods in it is going to free up a ton of extra skill point. And while you could technically get these skills on a Barbarian helmet, I won't hold anybody to the extreme of you need this to make it work. These are incredibly rare. The game's not supposed to generate in this way for combat skills other than leap, but it can. So just saying, there is an option out there. You can technically get a Barbarian Primal Helmet that has either Double Throw or Frenzy on it. Now, assuming that you are not going to get something with that option, a lower level helmet is going to be able to get you Leap, Throw Mastery, or Axe Mastery. In addition to that, being able to get Natural Resistance for free or increased speed for free would be really good. And then once you're in the Warcry tree, either being able to get access to Find Item, Battle Command, Battle Orders, or Warcry would be super good options on this helmet. And I think realistically, anything that gets you Find Item, Battle Orders, Battle Command, or Natural Res is something that's going to save you a lot of points not needing to go down any particular trees. You'll see on this version of the build, since we have Call to Arms on swap, I actually don't skill into Battle Orders or Battle Command because our plus skills will carry us to the point that we need them to be effective. But without Call to Arms, you are going to need to skill down into this. So you're going to have to pull 4 points out of either your Axe Mastery or any of the synergies for Frenzy be able to get down to these points. All of that being said, Wisdom is a phenomenal piece that solves for the vast majority of any of the challenges on this build, as well as getting you access to really strong high-level skills for free in a Barbarian helmet. For the amulet, even just a Cat's Eye is really good in the early game, so you can get that big movement speed, and then even cheaper than that, you could be using 2-piece Angelics. So as long as you have Cannot Be Frozen somewhere else, you wouldn't need the Ravenfrost, although Ravenfrost is a phenomenal piece on the build. The problem with it is if you're somebody who likes to use Find Item, this cold damage is going to shatter a couple corpses along the way. Your Mercenary is not using any cold damage, so you don't really have to worry about it in that regard, but just keep that in mind for Ravenfrost. For the gloves, quite honestly, Laying of Hands are just dirt cheap and you'll be able to pick them up from anywhere. For the belt, if you're not going for max pierce and relying more on Frenzy, you can obviously run something like a gold wrap here just to up your overall magic find and gold find, especially if you're doing those trav runs. And just about any good belt here, good res, good life, hit recovery, anything like that will go a long way. While there is some distinction between using either Gore Riders or War Travelers, quite frankly, you could use any boot that give you good mobility and good stats. So Inferno Stride now has Blaze when struck, and that's going to increase your movement speed even further. You can use good rare boots as long as they have at least 30 faster run walk, and then maybe Tri-Res and Magic Find or Hit Recovery. You can get some pretty nutso pairs of rare boots just as you're generally leveling, so throw on whatever you get. And then ultimately in the end game, you're really going to want War Travs if you're farming any density, and you're going to want Gore Riders if you are farming somewhere like Chaos Sanctuary where you need that additional Deadly Strike and Crushing Blow to eke out the higher DPS that you would need to make it efficient. Now, I said you don't need an inventory full of 320/20s. That is actually true. So any Grand Charm that's going to have damage and attack rating at all is going to be more than good enough down here. And then since we have access to natural resistances and battle command, your res is typically going to be capped out without even attempting to get there on the Barbarian. You really don't even need either hit recovery or magic find down here. You can also just use whatever damage charms that you find along the way. So anything with 1 max, 2 max, and good AR is going to get you there. Now that we have the stat screen open, I do want to talk a little bit more about how we are optimizing this version of Double Throw with our stat allocation. So you'll see on our main hand with Battle Command and Bow active, we're sitting close to 2500 max life. We're almost capped on all of our resistances, and we're actually overcapped for light res. And now we're sitting on a very good amount of attack rating for double throw, right? So about 10k flat. I've never seen flat AR before. And then for Frenzy, we're sitting on close to 8,000 attack rating. Now again, this with perfect gear, these values would be even higher. Damage on double throw without enchant on it at all is 5 to 6,400. And then you'll see that our Frenzy actually has higher average damage. So that's 900 to 5,700. I'll talk about how we got there. Weapons, when they are thrown, regardless of what the throwing weapon is, get 75% of your strength and 75% of your dexterity as additional enhanced damage. When an axe is used as a melee weapon, it's going to get 100% of your strength as additional enhanced damage. To be able to get the biggest benefit on our frenzy damage, as well as the biggest benefit on our throw damage, we actually want to shift click strength. You'll see that our strength is adding 395 ED when used for melee, and adding close to 300 ED when used for throw. On top of that, putting in a few extra points into dexterity above what's needed to use the base itself is obviously going to add to attack rating, but you're not going to see that damage added onto the frenzy side of it. So, if you are looking to maximize this frenzy damage to the hybrid version of the build, and you are going to be using dual lacerators, which again are doubling your chances of having that amp damage up, so you're actually going to be doing more damage when that procs than just having a high deadly strike on something like a war strike. You're getting the maximum amount of benefit for shift clicking strength, so this is going to be considered a glass cannon build, which I think is kind of funny since we're sitting on 6k defense, 2500 life, overcapped res on fire and lightning, which are the two most dangerous, and also able to shift click into a damage attribute here. Attack rating is going to be high enough since we're going to have mastery both for our melee and for our throwing weapon, and then we're getting the most ED that we possibly can out of this shift click strength. It helps to meld together all of these concepts, and I think without putting them together in this specific way, you're going to be missing out on certain qualities of life which actually open up the double throw barbarian. If you haven't already, go ahead and give this video a like if you either learned something or if you think that this is a good build, and subscribe to the channel as well. I would greatly appreciate it. Now that I'm done shilling out for myself, let me know what you think about this build down in the comments below. So I'd love to hear from you below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.